Here is your story. Forbidden love between two female prisoners, lesbian love. The first time Nadia saw her, the prison yard was soaked in the gray light of a January morning, and the cold had made everyone smaller, hunched and silent, but she was not small. She stood at the edge of the concrete yard with her arms folded across her chest, her dark eyes scanning the fences, like someone who had already memorized every exit that didn't exist, and something about the way she held herself, not proud, but unbroken, made Nadia stop walking entirely. Her name was Sera. Within 48 hours, every woman in Block C knew her name. Within a week, Nadia knew it the way you know a song you've heard only once, but cannot stop hearing in the dark. Nadia had been inside Haverford Women's Correctional for 2 years before Sera arrived. 2 years of the same gray walls, the same fluorescent ceiling that hummed like a wounded animal, the same bowl of oatmeal that tasted like wet paper every single morning. She had stopped feeling things the way she used to. Grief had dulled into something manageable, not healed, just compressed. She moved through the days the way water moves through a pipe, directed, contained, going nowhere of its own choosing. She had a daughter on the outside, a little girl named Leah who was 8 years old and being raised by Nadia's sister while Nadia served a key 5-year sentence for a crime that was born out of desperation and love for that same child. She had stolen money, a lot of it, from the man who had hurt her daughter, and the law had not cared about the why. The law had only cared about the what. Sera had been convicted of assault. The details came to Nadia slowly, in pieces, the way all truth comes inside a place where trust is a currency more scarce than kindness. Sera had beaten a man so badly he'd lost vision in one eye. The man had been her stepfather. He had been doing things to her younger sister for years. Sera had come home one night and found him, and something in her had simply detonated. The jury saw a violent woman, Nadia, when she finally heard the full story sitting beside Sera in the prison library on a cold Tuesday evening, saw something entirely different. She saw a woman who had loved someone so fiercely that she had set herself on fire, trying to protect them. That was the thing about Sera. She loved without calculation. It was the most dangerous and most beautiful thing about her. In a place designed to strip people of their softness, she remained somehow permeable, open in places most women had sealed shut years ago. She cried at letters from home. She laughed loudly at terrible jokes. She saved portions of her food for a woman, 3 cells down, who was ill and couldn't eat properly. Doing it quietly, never mentioning it. Only discovered because Nadia happened to see it happen one evening. Nadia watched these things and felt something stir in the compressed place inside her chest. Something that had been quiet for so long she'd nearly forgotten its name. They became friends the way you become friends in a place where time is the one thing you have too much of. Long conversations during yard time, walking slow circles around the concrete perimeter while winter melted, reluctantly into spring. They talked about their children, about food they missed, about the specific cruelty of birthdays spent inside, about music and memory and what they wanted their lives to look like on the other side of those fences. Nadia discovered that Sera had once wanted to be a nurse. Sera discovered that Nadia used to paint watercolors on Sunday mornings before everything collapsed. These small revelations felt precious. They handed them to each other carefully like fragile things. It was in the prison library, during a late afternoon session when the light came in gold and low through the narrow windows, that something shifted between them permanently. They were sitting side by side, reading, and Sera had fallen asleep against Nadia's shoulder without either of them noticing it happen. When Nadia realized, she did not move. She sat very still and felt the warmth of Sera's weight against her and understood, with the quiet certainty of someone who has stopped lying to themselves, that what she felt for this woman was not simply friendship. It was something older and larger and more frightening, and it lived in her body the way the cold lived in those walls and everywhere. All at once, impossible to ignore. She said nothing. Loving someone in a place like Haverford was not simply complicated. It was considered weakness, and weakness was the one luxury nobody could afford. The guards watched everything. The other inmates watched more. There were women in Block C who had been punished informally, socially, sometimes physically, for the crime of loving someone the wrong way. Nadia was afraid. Not the abstract fear of someone imagining a danger, but the concrete, close to the skin fear of someone who has already lost everything once and cannot survive losing it again. And yet Sera looked at her sometimes with an expression that Nadia could not misread, no matter how many times she tried to translate it into something safer. There was a tenderness in it, a particular quality of attention that is not friendship, and is not pity, but is something that has no clean name except the true one. One night, during a rare and precious hour when the block was quieter than usual, they sat in Nadia's cell and Sera took Nadia's hand and held it, not as comfort, not as gesture, as answer. They sat in the dim light holding hands and said nothing. And in that silence an entire world was built between them, private and fragile and absolutely real. Loving in secret requires a different kind of courage than loving in the open. It requires the constant discipline of performing normalcy while carrying something luminous inside. You that wants to be visible. They became experts in small things, so the particular way they could communicate entire sentences through a glance, across the yard, the casual arrangement of sitting close enough in the library that their arms touched, the way Sera would pass Nadia a note folded into the smallest possible square, filled with words that were plain and honest in the way only things written in secret can be. Nadia kept every note. She folded them into the binding of a book she kept under her mattress in with small paper, monuments to a love that had no legal standing, and no official language and no place in the world they were living in, but was more real than almost anything she had ever known. The cruelest part was not the hiding. It was the helplessness. When Sera was transferred to solitary confinement for 2 weeks following an altercation she had not started but had been blamed for, Nadia could not go to her, could not write officially, could not even ask about her without arousing suspicion. She spent those 2 weeks in a quiet agony that reminded her of early grief, the particular loneliness of missing someone who is not gone but is unreachable. She thought about Sera every hour. She thought about the way Sera laughed, high and sudden like it surprised her. She thought about the lines around Sera's eyes when she smiled, the way she tilted her head when she was listening carefully, the way she had once held Nadia's face in both her hands during a moment so intimate it had felt like prayer. When Sera came back from solitary, she was thinner and quieter. There was something worn down in her that hadn't been there before. They stood together in the yard on the day of her return, close but not touching, and Nadia looked at her and felt a grief so layered it had no single source. Grief for what they couldn't be to each other openly. Grief for what this place was doing to both of them. Grief for the years still ahead and underneath all of it, relentless and warm. The love itself, unchanged, undiminished, stubbornly alive. If you believe in the quiet, impossible strength of love, the kind that survives concrete walls and locked doors, and the cruelty of systems that were never built to hold tenderness, and then please like this video and subscribe, because this story was made for every heart that has ever loved in a place that said it wasn't allowed. There came a morning near the end of Nadia's 4th year when something changed. A new program had been introduced at Haverford, in a rehabilitation initiative that allowed inmates to attend structured art workshops run by volunteers from outside. Nadia signed up without expecting anything. But the instructor who came that first Thursday was a quiet woman with paint-stained fingers who looked at the women in that room like they were full human beings, and something about being seen that simply, after years of invisibility, cracked Nadia open. She began painting again. Small watercolors at first, tentative, like learning a language she used to speak fluently. Sera sat beside her every session. She was not a painter. She smeared color in thick, joyful strokes that looked like emotion rather than image. And Nadia watched her paint with the same feeling she'd had that first morning in the yard. Here is someone unbroken. The program became something more. Through the instructor, Nadia connected with a legal aid organization that reviewed her case. There had been procedural errors in her original trial. It took 11 months of paperwork and hearings and hope that felt dangerous to hold. But on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, Nadia received a sentence reduction. She would be out in 4 months. She sat with the letter shaking in her hands, and the first person she looked for was Sera. And when she found her in the yard and told her, Sera cried, not for herself, though Nadia knew she should have. Knew that Sera still had 18 months left on her sentence, but for Nadia, purely and completely, the way only someone who loves you with no self-interest can cry. Those final 4 months were the most tender and most painful of Nadia's time inside. Every small ritual they had built together, the library hours, the walked circles, the folded notes, became precious in a different way, saturated now with the foreknowledge of ending. They talked about the future honestly for the first time, about what the world outside looked like, about Leah, about Sera's sister who had written faithfully every month and was saving a room for Sera's return. They talked about what they were to each other without flinching from it, in the plain language of people who have been stripped of every pretense and know what is real. They made no promises that couldn't be kept. They made one promise that could, that they would not pretend this had not happened, that they would not reduce it to nothing to make it easier to carry, that they would hold it as what it was, love, true and whole, born in an impossible place, survival of the most human kind. On the morning of Nadia's release, Sera walked her to the processing area as far as she was allowed to go, and they stood at the boundary, that invisible line past which one of them could not follow, and held each other. For a long moment in the gray early light, Nadia felt Sera's arms around her and breathed her in and thought about every morning she had woken in that place and found, in the midst of all its harshness, one person who made her feel like herself, who had seen her without the prison-issue clothes, seen past the sentence and the record and the reduced circumstances, and found something worth staying close to. That kind of love, the kind that asks for nothing, and costs everything and survives anyway, is not a small thing. It is not less than any other love. In some ways, in the ways that matter most, it is more. Before you scroll away, drop a comment below telling us, have you ever loved someone in a place or a moment when the whole world said you couldn't? Let us know. Your story matters here. Nadia walked out into the October light. She had a phone number written on her palm in ink. She had 4 months of watercolors folded into her bag. She had a daughter waiting. And she had the particular knowledge that only people who have loved in the hardest circumstances possess, and that love, real love, does not require permission. It only requires the courage to feel it, the honesty to name it, and the strength to carry it gently through every door that tries to take it from you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love is not determined by where it finds you, but only by how true it is, please like, share, and subscribe. These stories are made for hearts like yours, and every share means another person gets to feel a little less alone.